In every world we have ever opened, there is a rule. The strong take, the weak are taken, and the powerful, the truly powerful, always want something. Hell counts on it. Hell is a marketplace. Every soul has a price. Every overlord has a hook. Every deal, every contract, every grinning handshake in the neon dark, it all works because somewhere, deep down, everybody wants. So what happens when hell meets a man who doesn't? He is not a sinner. He did not die. He is not hellborn. He is not an angel. He did not fall. He simply arrived, at the speed of light, in a place light was never meant to reach. He cannot be bound. He cannot be bought. He cannot be burned, cut, hypnotized, owned, or touched. Admiral Kizaru, the man who moves faster than a decision, and who has never, in 58 years, made one that mattered to him. Hell threw everything it had at him, and it all went right through. And then a one-eyed girl with a bomb in her fist asked him a question nobody in hell had thought to ask. Not what can you do for me? Just, what do you want? Ladies and gentlemen, damned and otherwise, this is the story of how the most invincible man in existence found the one thing in all of hell that could hurt him, and married it. Written by me, suggested by Sean Williams. And if you've got a universe rattling around in your skull, and a character you need dragged somewhere they don't belong, the comments are open, they always have been. Name the world and name the name, and I will find a way to break both. Somebody said Kizaru, so we lit hell up. Pentagram City, post-extermination, post-heaven's little war. 3 months after a light switched on, in a city that has only ever known red. Let's go. The turf war on 9th and Sinner was, by Cherri Bomb's professional standards, a solid 6, not a 10. A 10 was the one where she'd dropped a building on Serpentius and he'd popped out of the rubble to complain about the aesthetics. Not even an 8. An 8 had bodies stacked up like firewood and somebody's arm on a roof. This was a 6. Some no-name sinner called Grubbs had claimed 11 blocks of the 9th after the rebuild, put his stupid face on flyers, hired 40 guys with pipes and no imagination, and declared himself something. Overlord adjacent. A comer. Whatever the word was that week. Cherri had heard about it on a Tuesday, and shown up on a Tuesday. She was currently 3 stories up on a fire escape, one boot hooked in the railing, hair whipping in the heat coming off the street, and she was laughing so hard she nearly dropped the bomb she was holding. Below her, Grubbs's 40 guys were discovering that 11 blocks is a lot of blocks to defend when the thing you're defending against is a 5'2" demon girl with a bag full of ordnance and absolutely no plan. "Oh, why?" she screamed down at them, delighted. "Grubbsy, come out and play, you coward." Something exploded. She hadn't thrown anything yet. She made a mental note to figure out later what that had been, decided she probably wouldn't, and threw 4 bombs at once. The 9th had a smell to it, even before the fire. Old grease and hot asphalt and the sweet chemical rot of the canal 2 streets over, which had been running a color for a month that nobody had a name for. Neon buzzed everywhere. Pink, green, a sign for a place called 6 Feet Under. Live girls, that had been broken so long it just said, "Ix feet und." Ive girl. The sky above it was the same sky it always was. Red, low, a pentagram burned into it like a brand on a cow, which, when you thought about it too long, was more or less the joke. Cherri did not think about it too long. Cherri had never thought about anything too long in her afterlife, and she considered that a virtue. She dropped off the fire escape, landed on a car, dented it, apologized to nobody, and went hunting. She got 2 blocks before she noticed that the street ahead of her was empty. Not damaged empty. Not everybody ran away empty. Empty like a parted crowd. Grubbs's guys were still there. She could see 40 of them, or 36 now, clumped on the sidewalks, pipes in hands, backs to the shop fronts. But they were all pressed to the edges of the road, and none of them were on the road, and none of them were looking at her. They were looking at the man standing in the middle of it. He was leaning on nothing. That was Cherri's first thought, and it stayed her favorite. There was a lamppost 8 feet away he could have leaned on, and instead, he had arranged himself in the exact posture of a man leaning, against nothing at all, in the middle of a war zone, with his hands in his pockets. The suit was yellow, not gold, not mustard. Yellow, a violent citrus yellow with pinstripes, the kind of yellow that made a demon's eye water. Over it he wore a long white coat, draped off his shoulders, with the arms hanging empty, which was, Cherri had to admit, an absolutely filthy move. He was tall. He was old, or oldish, with a thin little beard, and a face like a man about to nod off in a warm room. He had a piece of candy in his mouth. She could hear it clicking against his teeth from 20 feet away, which meant the entire street had gone quiet enough to hear it. He was watching a burning bin. "Oh," he said, to the bin. "That's dangerous." Cherri looked at Grubbs's men. Grubbs's men, 36 of them, 3 of whom were on fire, all looked back at her, with an expression she had never seen on a sinner's face in the entire time she'd been dead. It took her a second to place it, because it was so out of context here. It was the look you give someone when they're standing on a train track. "Oi," Cherri said. Nobody answered. "Oi, what's with the geezer?" One of them, a bat-faced kid with a pipe he was holding like a rosary, said without moving his lips much, Don't what? Don't?" Cherri Bomb had a philosophy. It was not a complicated philosophy, and she'd never written it down, but if you'd forced her to, it would have been about 1 line long. If everyone in the room agrees not to do something, someone should probably do it, and it might as well be me. She pulled the pin. The bomb she threw was one of the good ones. She made them herself, out of a recipe she'd stolen from a chemist in the 4th, and improved by adding more of everything. It went in flat and fast and true, right at his sternum, and it was already sparking when it left her hand, and she had time to think, "This is going to be so funny," before it hit. It went through him, not around, not blocked, through. The bomb passed into his chest and out his back and kept going, and where it passed through, the man came apart into light. Just for an instant, a sheet of sun-colored particles hanging in the shape of a man in a yellow suit, and then the bomb was past him and detonating in the road behind, and the light folded back together, and he was standing there again, exactly as before. The candy clicked, the blast wave hit, and blew his coat sideways, and ruffled absolutely nothing else about him. The heat of it hit Cherri in the face a half-second later, and she stood there in it, one eye enormous, mouth open. The man turned his head. He looked at her for what felt like a really long time, and was probably 2 seconds. Sleepy eyes. Amused, maybe, in a way that wasn't quite aimed at anything. "Ara," he said. "That was rude." And Cherri Bomb, 26 years dead, 91 confirmed turf wars, never once in her life or afterlife owned by a single soul, laughed so hard she fell over. She sat down in the road, in the fire, in the middle of a war she was winning, and laughed until her ribs hurt, and her eye watered, and Grubbs's men fled around her in a slow-motion panic she barely registered, and the man in the yellow suit watched her do it with the mild, patient interest of someone watching a dog do a trick. "You're a logia," she wheezed. "You're a what? You're made of something. What are you, plasma? Neon? Oh my God, are you neon? That'd be so on brand for this dump." "Light," he said. "Light? That's not a thing." "Oh," he said, and sighed, like it was a great burden. "It's a thing. Here's what hell knew about him. 3 months in, and you should understand that hell had worked very hard for it. He had arrived on a Thursday, not through a rift in the sky, not out of a summoning circle full of screaming, not down from the clouds trailing feathers. He had arrived in the back room of a pawn shop in the 5th Ring's worst block, because a sinner named Denny Vosk had cut a deal. Vosk had been nobody. That's the part that keeps people up at night. Vosk was a man who'd sold televisions when he was alive, and sold slightly worse televisions when he was dead. And he'd been in a turf beef he was going to lose, and he'd scraped together every favor he had, and gone to a minor overlord in Cannibal Town, a small operator, 3 souls to her name, the kind of overlord who advertises. And Vosk had asked for the standard package, a weapon, muscle, something to win with. And because Denny Vosk had watched too many movies and had a small man's appetite for big words, he hadn't said a guy with a gun. He'd said, "The strongest man alive." That's the thing about hell's contract magic. It is not smart, it is not kind, it is literal, and it is old, and it has never once in all of eternity been given a reason to check its work. So when the deal sealed and the handshake burned, the magic went looking for the strongest man alive, and it did not find him in hell, because in hell nobody is alive. And it did not find him in heaven, because in heaven nobody is a man, and it did not find him on earth, because whatever the strongest man alive on earth was doing that Thursday, it wasn't enough. So it reached further, and somewhere very far away, in a world with a different sky, it found a beam of light traveling between two islands at 300,000 kilometers a second, and it grabbed the light, the way you'd grab a rope, and it pulled, and the man attached to the light came with it. He'd stood in the back room of a pawn shop in the Fifth, looked around at the mildew and the water damage and the flickering fluorescent tube, and said, this isn't Marineford. Denny Vosk, to his eternal and extremely brief credit, kept it together. He had the contract in his hand. It was still smoking. He held it up and he said the words he'd been rehearsing all week, and they were, "You belong to me now, so here's what you're gonna do." The man in the yellow suit looked at the paper. He took his time. He was, everyone would learn, a man who took his time about everything, which was the single funniest fact about him, because he was also the fastest thing that had ever existed. "Oh," he said at last, "that's your signature there. Yeah? And that's your handshake. Right there." A slow nod. That's a shame." "What?" "Well," Kizaru scratched his cheek, "you made a deal. I didn't." And then he walked out. Just walked. Past Vosk, through the door, into the street, hands in his pockets, and every single thing the contract magic tried to do to him on the way out. Every hook, every clause, every ancient teeth-in-the-soul mechanism that hell has used to own the damned since before Pentagram City had streets, went through him like it wasn't there. Because it wasn't there. Because he had never agreed to anything. The contract had been fulfilled to the letter. The strongest man alive, delivered. And a contract that has been fulfilled has nothing left to hold. So it burned out. And it burned out the way a fuse does. Backwards, through the only signature it had. They found Denny Vosk's outline on the wall. The overlord who'd sold him the deal shut her operation down within the week and moved to a different ring, and has never once, in the years since, taken another contract with a superlative in it. That was the Thursday. Hell spent the next 3 months finding out. They tested him, because of course they did. This is hell. A new thing arrives and every hand in the room reaches for it before anyone asks what it is. Carmilla Carmine sent an appraiser and got back a report she read twice and then locked in a drawer. Velvet put him on the feeds. She got 11 million views in a night, and then every screen in her studio blew out at once, and the footage came back overexposed, every frame of it, a white smear in a yellow suit, because you cannot photograph a man who is what the camera is made of. Zestial, who is older than the concept of the city, went to look at him from 4 blocks away, said nothing at all, and went home. A hellhound syndicate in the 4th put a hit on him, for reasons nobody has ever established. They emptied 900 rounds into a street corner. He was still there when they finished. He said, "That's very loud," and asked if anyone knew where to get a coffee. Somebody stabbed him with a knife made of angelic steel. You need to understand what that means. Angelic steel is the answer. It is the one true full stop in this entire realm. The metal that ends sinners, ends demons, ends overlords, ends angels. Permanent. No coming back. The only thing in hell that is genuinely final. Carmilla Carmine built an empire on knowing where it comes from. Wars have been fought over ounces of it. It is the reason the exterminations worked, and the reason heaven has been able to keep its boot on this place for centuries. And the thing about angelic steel, the thing nobody in hell had ever needed to think about, because nobody in hell had ever needed to, is that it is anti-demon. It is anti-angel. It is a key cut for a specific lock, and it opens that lock like it isn't there. Kizaru is not a demon. Kizaru is not an angel. Kizaru is a 58-year-old man from a world hell has never heard of, and he is alive, and against him a blade of angelic steel is a knife, a very good knife, a nice knife, a knife that goes through a body made of photons, the same way a knife goes through a sunbeam, which is to say it goes through it, and then you are a man holding a knife in a sunbeam, and the sunbeam is looking at you. The sinner who tried it is still alive, technically. He lives in a basement now. He doesn't talk about it. And so, 3 months in, hell had assembled a picture, and the picture was this. There was a man in the pride ring who could not be killed, could not be bound, could not be filmed, could not be bought, could not be threatened, could not be hurt, and this was the part that made every overlord in Pentagram City sit up at night with a drink they didn't want. Could not be motivated. Because they'd tried that too. They'd tried the whole catalog. Money, souls, territory, power, flesh, vengeance. Alastor himself had gone on the air about it. A Tuesday broadcast, static crackling through every radio in the city. That grinning voice purring. A newcomer, friends. How thrilling. And what does our mysterious yellow gentleman desire? Why, I intend to find out. That is, after all, my little specialty. The radio demon had found out. Alastor had gone and asked, personally, with all the theater that implies, and what he'd gotten back was a slow blink and a sleepy smile, and the words, "Oh, nothing, I think." Alastor had not gone on the air about it since. Because hell runs on wanting, that's the whole machine. Every deal, every hook, every overlord's empire, every soul in every ledger in every ring. It all rests on the fact that everybody wants something, and once you know what a person wants, you own the road to it, and once you own the road, you own the person. That is hell. That is the only thing hell is. And a man who wants nothing isn't invincible because you can't hurt him. He's invincible because there's nothing to aim at. So what you want then? They were sitting on a curb. Cherri didn't remember deciding to sit on a curb. It had just sort of happened, the way things happened around this guy. You started out planning to throw a bomb at him, and 40 minutes later you were on the 9th with your boots in a gutter full of something luminous, sharing a bag of candy with a man who could probably take the roof off the world. Grubbs had fled. The 9th was hers. She'd forgotten about it around minute 6. He was watching the sky. He watched things a lot. Not like he was looking for anything. Like a man at a bus stop. Everybody wants something, Cherri said. She dug in the bag. Val wants everything. Vox wants everyone to look at him. Alastor wants, I don't know, whatever the hell Alastor wants, to be entertained, probably. Charlie wants everyone to be nice. Angie wants, and she stopped, and the pause sat there in the street for a second. Ugly. And she moved past it the way she moved past everything. Fast. Point is, everybody wants something. It's the only thing this dump's got going on. So, she threw a candy at his head. It went through and rattled off the pavement behind him. What'd you want, mate? Kizaru thought about it. He genuinely thought about it. That was the thing that got her. He wasn't being cute. He tilted his head back and he looked up at the red sky over Pentagram City with those half-shut eyes. And he actually, honestly considered the question, for a good long while, in a way that suggested he had not considered it in some time, maybe ever. Oh, he said finally. He sounded almost apologetic. Nothing, I think. Bull. No. Everybody wants something. Do they? He said it pleasantly. That sounds exhausting. Cherri stared at him with her one enormous eye. There was a job, he offered, after a moment. Like he was doing her a favor, orders and so on. I did that, very good at it. A shrug that barely moved his shoulders. And now I'm here, and there aren't any orders here. He put another candy in his mouth, clicked it against his teeth. So, a little smile. It's very peaceful. And Cherri Bomb sat on the curb of a street she'd just conquered, in the middle of a city that had eaten every good thing she'd ever had. Next to a man who could unmake it all in under a second, and simply had no reason to, and she felt something she was going to spend the next several weeks refusing to name. Mate, she said, that's the saddest fucking thing I ever heard in my life. The man in the yellow suit laughed. It was a small laugh, dry, brief, a little surprised. The sound of something rusted turning over once. And in 3 months in hell, across 900 rounds and 1 angelic blade, and 11 million views, and a personal audience with the radio demon himself, it was the first time anybody had gotten one out of him. He looked at her. She'd remember that later. Everyone would, eventually. The way he looked at her. "Ara," said Kizaru. "You're a strange one." The thing about Cherri Bomb is that she does not ask permission, and she does not ask questions, and she does not, under any circumstances, let a good time get away from her. So she kept him. Not in a possessive way. She'd have taken your teeth out for suggesting it. She just started showing up. She showed up at the corner in the 5th, where he'd taken to standing, because he had no address and had never once mentioned needing one. She showed up with a bag of ordnance and a plan that wasn't a plan, and said, "Oi, geezer, I'm doing a thing, come watch." And he said, "Oh, all right," and put his hands in his pockets and came and watched. That was the arrangement, for a while. She did crimes. He watched. He was a spectacular audience. That was the part nobody expected, least of all her. He never helped, never once, in 6 weeks, lifted a finger in one of her wars. But he watched with this drowsy, delighted attention, like a man at a matinee, and when she pulled something genuinely stupid off, he'd say, "Oh, that's not safe," in a tone of such warm approval that she started doing more of them just to hear it. She dropped a water tower on a gang from the 7th. That's not safe. She fought a bloke on the roof of a moving trolley and lost the trolley. Oh my. She jumped off the 8th Street radio mast, holding 4 bombs and a grudge, and hit the pavement hard enough to crater it, and got up, and the first thing she heard was a slow, dry chuckle from somewhere up in the neon, and a voice saying, "Now that's just showing off." "Yeah, it is," she screamed at the sky, and threw a bomb at nothing, out of joy. Pentagram City noticed. Pentagram City always notices. Within a month, the story had gone around every bar in the Pride Ring. The bomb girls got the yellow man following her around. And the story had a shape people liked, because it was a shape they understood. She'd landed him, hadn't she? Clever girl. Got the unbeatable thing on a leash. Everyone assumed there was a deal. Everyone assumed there was an angle. Because if there wasn't an angle, then a man with that much power was walking around this city for no reason at all. And that was too frightening to hold in your head for very long. There was no deal. There was no angle. She'd asked him once, 8 beers deep in a bar on the 9th, why he bothered. He'd thought about it, in that unhurried way, and said, "You're the only thing here that's moving." She hadn't known what to do with that, so she'd hit him. Her fist went through his jaw and out the other side, and she overbalanced and fell off the stool, and he said, "Oh, careful," without moving. And she lay on the sticky floor laughing at the ceiling, and the answer just sat there in her chest where she'd shoved it, glowing, for weeks. She brought him to the hotel on a Sunday, which was the worst possible day, because Sunday was when Charlie did trust activities. The Hazbin Hotel, rebuilt, taller than before, uglier in a way that had grown on people, was at that point the most famous building in hell, and the least respected. It had done the impossible twice now. Serpentius had gone up. Then Heaven's War had come down, and the whole rotten arrangement between the realms had cracked open, and now both sides knew, actually knew, that a damned soul could be redeemed. You'd think that would have fixed things. What it had actually done was fill the lobby with about 40 sinners who did not want to be better people and did want to be unkillable, and had heard this was the place where the Princess of Hell taught you how. And that's why, Charlie was saying, with the incandescent sincerity of a woman who had said this 1,100 times, and meant it every single time. We're going to go around the circle, and everyone's going to share one thing they're proud of. "I killed a guy," said someone. "One thing they're proud of that isn't a crime. Tim killed 2 guys. The doors banged open. Cherri Bomb came through them the way she came through everything, sideways and loud, with a bag over her shoulder and an announcement already in progress. "Charlie! Charlie! Charlie!" "I brought a bloke." Kizaru drifted in behind her at exactly 1/2 of walking speed, taking in the chandelier. The lobby went very quiet. There is a specific silence a room makes when 40 career criminals simultaneously recognize a man they have all heard about, and none of them have seen. It is not fear exactly. It is the sound of 40 people doing math. "Oh," said Kizaru to the chandelier. "That's crooked." "It's artistic," said Nifty from somewhere near the ceiling. Charlie Morningstar, to her eternal credit, did not do the math. Charlie looked at the most dangerous being to enter her hotel since the day her father knocked on the door, and she saw a guest, and her entire face lit up like the pentagram going off. "Oh my gosh. Hi. Hi. Welcome to the Hazbin Hotel. Are you here to redeem your soul?" Kizaru looked down at her, mild as milk. "Oh, no. That's okay. That's totally okay. A lot of people start there." She was already shaking his hand. She was shaking his hand. Cherri watched a bead of sweat crawl down the back of Vaggy's neck from across the room. "Everyone starts somewhere. Do you want a room? We have rooms. We have so many rooms we overbuilt, honestly." "Charlie?" said Vaggy, in the voice of a woman diffusing something. "Charlie? What's your name?" "Borsellino." He considered it. "Kizaru's fine." "Kizaru. Great. Fantastic. So the first step of redemption is admitting. He's not a sinner, love," said Cherri, dropping into an armchair and putting her boots on the coffee table. "He's not dead. He's just here." The silence changed shape. Vaggy's hand had found the grip of her spear. "What do you mean he's not dead?" "I mean he's not dead. Wanna see?" Cherri produced a bomb from somewhere with the casual flourish of a woman producing a lighter, and everyone in the lobby moved at once. Vaggy's wings snapped out. Angel Dust said, "Oh, we're doing this." And Husk, without looking up, calmly slid the good bottles under the bar. Cherri lobbed it underhand at the back of Kizaru's head. He didn't turn around. The bomb went through his skull and out through the middle of his forehead, trailing sun-colored particles, and detonated against the far wall. And Nifty said, "Ooh," and immediately began sweeping. Kizaru reassembled without any apparent involvement in the process. He was still shaking Charlie's hand. He hadn't stopped. "That's dangerous," he told Cherri, over his shoulder. "It's hilarious." And that was when the static came in. It came the way it always came, not from a direction. The lights browned out to a sick sepia. The edges of the room went black and white and grainy. An old-time band struck up somewhere far away and slightly wrong, and the temperature dropped about 10 degrees in 100 years. "Well," said Alastor, from directly behind Kizaru, where nobody had been. "The yellow gentleman himself. In my hotel." "It's my hotel," said Charlie. "In my hotel." Alastor's grin was a fixed and terrible architecture. The radio dial eyes spun up. He leaned in, cane tucked, voice purring out of every speaker in a building that had no speakers. "You know, sir, we've met, briefly, some months ago. I asked you a question, and you gave me the most disappointing answer of my entire afterlife, and I have thought about it, on and off, ever since." Kizaru finally let go of Charlie's hand. He turned around. He looked at the radio demon, the thing that had made overlords disappear, that had walked into this ring and eaten 7 of them in a week, that ran on fear the way the city ran on rot. And there was not one flicker of anything in his face at all. "Oh," said Kizaru, "the radio fella?" The band went slightly more wrong. "Indeed," Alastor's voice held. His voice always held. "And I've come to say, I withdraw the question. Entirely. I've realized I asked the wrong one." He began to circle, slow, theatrical, static, crawling off him in red threads, the whole room dimming toward him like a stage. "I asked what you want, sir, and you said nothing, and I confess it wounded me, because you see, in my long and colorful career, every man wants money, power, vengeance, an audience, his mother's approval." Ha! A burst of canned laughter from nowhere. "But you had nothing. And do you know what I have decided about that?" I've decided." And here he stopped and dropped it a full octave, and the grin didn't move, but everything behind it did. "That a man who wants nothing has simply not yet been shown anything. He let that sit. Then he flung an arm out, bright as a shot, and the room snapped back to color. And he was jovial again, deafeningly so. So no deal today, no deal at all. I shall simply watch. The cane spun. He was already fading, static folding him up like a signal going out. Watching is free after all, and I do so love a long broadcast. And he was gone. Cherri, boots still on the table, said, God, I hate him. He grows on you, said Charlie. So does mold, said Husk. Cherri wasn't listening, because Kizaru had turned his head, just slightly, just an inch, and he wasn't watching the space where Alastor had been at all. He was watching angel dust. Angel had come down late, and he'd come down loud, which was the tell, though only 2 people in the lobby knew it well enough to read. He came down doing the whole show, the swagger, the forearm hair flip. Well, 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 look what the Cherri dragged in. And honey, I mean dragged. Is that a suit, or did a taxi throw up? And it was funny. It was genuinely funny. Angel Dust was the funniest person in hell, and he had never once in his afterlife let a room see him be anything else. And Cherri watched her best friend work the room and saw the sleeve pulled down over the wrist, and the way he sat, a little sideways, weight off the left, and the way his eyes went to the door twice in 2 minutes. Val had him back. That was the whole sentence. That was all of it. Everybody in the lobby knew, in the way people know things they can't do anything about, and so nobody said it, because saying it would mean the room had to look at it. Charlie had tried. Charlie had tried. She'd gone down to the studio herself, and Vaggie had gone with her, and they'd come back with nothing, because Valentino owned Angel Dust's soul the way a man owns a chair. Not by force. Never by force. Because 70 years ago a scared kid with a needle in his arm had shaken a hand. That's the trick. That's the whole trick of this place. Hell never takes. Hell offers, and waits, and lets you do the taking to yourself, and then it's yours forever, and the paperwork's clean. Cherri had blown up 3 of Val's studios. She'd done it out of love, and it had accomplished exactly nothing, because you can't bomb a signature. Oi, she said, when Angel finally sat down next to her. Quiet, not her volume at all. Don't. He was still smiling. He was always still smiling. Chair, don't. I didn't say nothing. You were gonna. I was gonna, she agreed. Angel Dust looked at his hands. 4 of them. He picked at a cuff. So fine, he said. It's, you know, it's the gig. And Cherri Bomb, who had never wanted anything she couldn't take, who had spent 26 years dead perfecting the art of being a woman with no wants at all, sat in the ugly rebuilt lobby of the only hopeful building in hell and wanted something so badly, it went through her like the knife had gone through the sunbeam. She didn't say anything. She just leaned over and put her head on his shoulder, on the good side, and he let her, and that was that. Kizaru left the hotel 40 minutes later. Charlie walked him to the door. Charlie walked everyone to the door, and she was talking the whole way, about rooms and about second chances, and about how the offer stayed open forever. It literally never expired. That was kind of the whole thing about it. He listened with polite, sleepy patience. At the threshold, he stopped. That one, he said. Charlie blinked. Sorry? The spider fella. He nodded back at the lobby, where Angel was making 6 sinners laugh at a joke about Val's cologne, telling it perfectly, landing every beat. Somebody owns him. The hope went out of Charlie's face all at once, and what was under it was very old and very tired. Yeah, she said. Valentino. It's a soul contract. They're binding. Really binding. My dad can't even... She stopped, started again. I've read it. I've had lawyers read it. There's no out. He signed. Kizaru put his hands in his pockets. He looked back at the lobby for a while, at the loud, tall spider demon being hilarious, and Charlie couldn't read a single thing in that face. Oh, he said at last, and then he strolled off into the neon, unhurried, a man with nowhere to be and no reason to be anywhere, and Charlie Morningstar stood in her doorway and had absolutely no idea what she'd just watched happen. 3 miles away, In a room at the top of a tower shaped like a television, 4 overlords were having a meeting they'd been putting off for 3 months. Velvet had the footage, all of it, every ruined frame, that white smear in a yellow suit. Vox had a wall of screens all showing the same nothing. Valentino was smoking so hard, the room had a weather system, and Vox, who was smaller now than he'd been a year ago, in every way that mattered, who had marched on heaven and been handled, and who had spent every day since chewing on it. Vox was the one who said it. "He's not the problem," Vox said. "He's literally He's not a problem, Val. He's a rock. You don't have a problem with a rock. You can't threaten a rock. You can't buy a rock. You can't hypnotize a rock. You can't hurt a rock. You know what you do with a rock?" Velvet, not looking up from her phone. "Nothing. You do nothing with a rock. That's the point of a rock, babe. You find the lever." Vox's screen was crawling with spirals. He was smiling. It was a bad smile. "Everybody's got a lever. He didn't have one for 3 months. Fine. Great. Nothing to grab." He turned the wall of screens. Every one of them lit up with the same image, a curb on the 9th, 2 figures sitting on it, a bag of candy between them, and a 5'2" demon girl, with one enormous eye, mid-laugh, head thrown back, glowing gold down one side from the light coming off the man next to her. "He's got one now," said Vox. They started with Angel, because of course they did. Not because it was clever, because it was easy, and because Valentino had exactly one instrument in his whole orchestra, and he'd been playing it for 70 years, and he was very good at it. Vox laid it out in the tower like a man drawing on a whiteboard. "You can't threaten the rock. You can't threaten the girl either. The girl's a lunatic. The girl would eat a threat and ask for seconds. And anyway, if you touch her, the rock might finally decide to be a rock at you." And Vox had already been on the wrong end of one impossible thing this year, and had the scar tissue to prove it. "So you don't touch her. You make her come to you. You want her to walk in that door," Vox said, "and ask, on her own, wanting it so bad she can't see the floor." Velvet, still not looking up. "And she'd want what, exactly? She's got no money, no turf worth a damn, no ambition. She literally blows things up for fun. She's a fucking golden retriever with a detonator." Valentino let out a long pink lungful of smoke and smiled around his cigarette holder and said, in that oily purr, "She's got a friend." So on a Wednesday, Angel Dust didn't come home. That's all. That's the whole move. He didn't come home Wednesday and he didn't come home Thursday, and on Friday the hotel got a call, and Charlie took it, and Charlie's face did something that made Vaggie stand up out of her chair before a single word had been said. Val had him under studio lockdown, perfectly legal, and that's the obscenity of it. That's the thing that makes your teeth itch. It was legal. Valentino owned Angel Dust's soul, and a soul in hell is property, and a man may do with his property whatever he likes, and a man may keep his property indoors if he chooses. Charlie had lawyers. Charlie's lawyers said what Charlie's lawyers always said, which was he signed. Cherri went through the front wall of the studio on Friday night. She got about 40 feet in. That's further than most. She took out 2 floors, 6 cameras, and a producer, and she was screaming his name in a stairwell full of pink smoke when 8 of Val's boys got hands on her, and they didn't hurt her. That was the instruction. Don't you dare mark her. They just carried her, thrashing, biting, one of them missing an ear by the end of it, all the way up to the top, where Valentino was waiting, in a room the size of a cathedral, with the lights already set, and Angel Dust was in a chair in the middle of it. He was fine. That was the thing. That's what made her stop fighting. Actually stop. Go dead still in 8 sets of hands. He was fine. He was sitting in a chair in his own clothes, with a drink in one hand and a cigarette in another, and he looked fine. And he looked at her, and his face did something complicated and fast, and then went smooth. And he said, "Hey, Cher," in his lightest, brightest, most hilarious guy-in-the-room voice, and it was the most frightening thing she had ever heard in 26 years of being dead. Because you don't put a man in a chair under a key light to hurt him. You do it so somebody can look at him. "There she is," said Valentino. He was enormous. People forgot that. They remembered the coat and the heart-shaped glasses and the theater, and forgot that Valentino was 9 feet of moth in a room he owned, and that he had 4 hands and used all of them, and that he had never once in his existence been told no by anything he actually cared about. "Cherry bomb," he said, savoring it. "Baby doll, you have been busy. Let him go." Said Valentino. "Sure." The room stopped. "Sure," Cherri said. "Sure." He spread all 4 arms, magnanimous, delighted, and the pink smoke rolled off him like weather. "You think I'm a monster? I'm a businessman. Everything's for sale, sugar. That's the beauty of this town. You just gotta know what a thing costs." He drifted closer. He didn't walk. Val never walked. "You want him out? Out of the contract? Out of the studio? Out of my ledger? Off my books forever? Free and clear? No strings? No clauses? The whole thing torn up in front of you?" Cherri's mouth was dry. Her one eye was enormous. "You can't," she said. "It's a soul contract. There's no out," Charlie said. "There's no out for him," said Valentino, and he smiled with every tooth he had. "He can't buy himself back. Poor bastard's got nothing to buy with. I already own it, but I can sell him. I can sell him to anybody, anytime, for any price I like. That's what ownership is, doll. That's the whole point of the thing." He stopped in front of her. He bent down, 9 feet of him, folding over, until the heart-shaped glasses were level with her face, and she could see her own reflection in both of them, twice, tiny. "So make me an offer," said Valentino, and Cherry Bomb, who had never wanted anything, said, "I ain't got nothing." "Oh," said Val, and it was so close to the way he said it that Cherry's stomach turned over. "Baby, baby, baby, baby." He tapped a claw against her chest. "Once. You got one thing," he said. "Everybody's got exactly one thing. It's the same thing. It's always been the same thing." He straightened up and turned and threw his arms out to the cathedral of a room, to the cameras that were absolutely still rolling, and roared it like a punchline. "That's the game." Somewhere behind the lights, Velvet laughed. "Chair." Angel was out of the chair. 2 of Val's boys had him by the arms before he'd got 3 steps, and he didn't fight them. He just leaned against the grip, straining, and every scrap of the comedy was gone out of his face, and what was under it was 70 years old and screaming. "Chair. No. Cherry. Look at me. Look at me. Don't you feckin' dare. Don't you dare. I ain't worth." "Shut up, Angie," said Cherry. "I ain't worth it. I'm a—" "Shut up." And he did. Because there was something in her voice he'd never heard before. Not in 50 years of friendship. Not once. And it took him a second to place it. And when he placed it, he stopped breathing. She wasn't angry. She'd made up her mind. "Here's the thing. Nobody tells you about hell. And it's the only true thing in the whole rotten place. It doesn't take. It has never once taken. Not a single soul in every ledger in every ring was ever taken by force. Not one. Not ever. That's not how it works. That's not how it can work. Angelic steel can kill you. An overlord can gut you and eat you and wear your teeth. But nobody in all of creation can reach into your chest and pull out the deed to you. Because the deed to you only opens from the inside. So hell waits. Hell is enormously patient. Hell puts the thing you love in a chair under a nice light, and then it stands back and lets you do it to yourself. And it never lies to you. That's the part that gets people. It tells you the price up front, and honest, and then it hands you the pen, and it doesn't push. It doesn't have to push. Because everybody wants something. That's the machine. That's the only machine. And the reason a man in a yellow suit had walked through this city for 3 months like a ghost through a wall, untouched by 900 rounds and 1 angelic blade, and the radio demon himself, was not that he was strong. It was that he'd never given it a handle. She went to the hotel first. She'd like that on the record. She stood in the rebuilt lobby at 2 in the morning, and she said the words out loud to Charlie Morningstar, all of them. And Charlie, bless her, actually bless her, the only clean thing in this entire ring. Charlie tried. Charlie was on the phone in 90 seconds. Charlie called every lawyer she had. Charlie called Carmilla, who listened and said no. Charlie called her father at 3 in the morning. And Cherri stood there and listened to the Princess of Hell beg the King of Hell to break a contract, and listened to the King of Hell, reality-shaping, archangel-born, the being who took Adam apart like a chicken, say very quietly, in the voice of a man who has explained this before, and hated it every time, "Sweetheart, I can't. I made the rule. That's the one thing down here that's actually mine, and it's the only thing I ever did that was fair. And if I break it for one person, I've broken it for everybody who ever signed." Charlie hung up. She stood there a second. Then she said, okay, new plan. And Cherri said, "Nah, Cherri, you've got a good thing here, Charlie." Cherri was already walking. She hadn't sat down the whole time. Genuinely. "It's stupid and it's ugly, and it's never gonna work, and it's the best thing anyone's ever done in this dump. Don't get it dirty on my account, yeah? That is literally what it's for." The door shut. She didn't tell Kizaru. That was deliberate. She thought about it for one full block and then put it away. And here's why. And she'd never say it out loud to anyone, ever. She'd worked out what she was. For 6 weeks, she'd been the only thing in this city that was moving, and she'd carried that around in her chest like a coal, and it had kept her warm through some genuinely cold nights. And then Val had put Angel in a chair under a light, and she'd stood in that room and understood, all at once, exactly what a man with no wants and no weaknesses and no handles turns into the moment he finds one. He turns into a man with a handle. She'd looked around that cathedral at the cameras and the lights and the pink smoke, and she had understood, with total clarity, that this was not about her at all, that it had never been about her, that she was a lever, that the second the yellow man came through that door to get her, Hell would finally, after 3 months, have somewhere to aim. So she went alone, at 4 in the morning, and she went the back way, because the last gift she had to give was to be the reason nobody ever pointed anything at him. The contract was 6 feet long. Val had it printed. Of course he had it printed. He had it printed on that heavy cream-colored paper that overlords use, with the black hell script that moves a little when you're not looking straight at it. And he had it laid out on a table, and he had 2 cameras on it, and Vox was there. Vox had come down for this. Vox had come down from his own tower to watch, which told you everything. And Velvet had her phone up, and there was a ring light. "Read it," Val said generously. "Take your time, doll. I want you happy." She read it. The first half was Angel. It was clean. It was disgustingly clean. She read it 3 times looking for the hook, and there wasn't one. And that's how she knew how badly they wanted this. Because Valentino had given up something, and Valentino had never given up anything in his life. The sole contract held on the sinner known as Angel Dust, formerly Anthony, is hereby dissolved entire. All claims released. All debts void. Signatory restored to unowned status, in perpetuity. Unowned status, in perpetuity. She read that line about 9 times. The second half was her. And this is where it happened, and it's important, and nobody in that room noticed it. Not Vox, who was the smartest person present. Not Velvet, who was recording. Not Cherri, who could barely see the page. Because Valentino was standing in his own studio in front of 2 cameras and his business partners and a ring light. And he was about to win the biggest thing anyone in Pentagram City had won in 100 years. And Valentino had never once in his existence been able to keep his mouth to a normal size. His lawyers had written the soul of the sinner known as Cherry Bomb. Val had crossed it out, in front of everyone, with a flourish, because it wasn't big enough, and he'd written, in his own hand, in letters 4 inches tall, everything she is, and everything that's hers. The whole package. Forever. And then he'd underlined it, twice. "That's not, Val, that's not how you," one of the lawyers had started, hours ago, and Valentino had picked him up by the face and put him through a wall, and that had been the end of the legal review. Cherri looked at it. 4-inch letters. Double underlined. She almost laughed. She didn't know why. Some tired animal part of her, way down at the bottom, went ha, and she didn't have the energy to ask it what was funny. "'S a bit much," she said. "I am a bit much, baby." Valentino was radiant. He was glowing. Sign. They brought Angel in. They brought him in so she could see. and they had him by all four arms, and he was fighting now, really fighting, and he was crying and swearing and saying her name over and over, and Val's boys had to put a hand over his mouth in the end, which Val allowed, because it looked good on camera. Cherri picked up the pen. She looked at Angel Dust. 50 years, 2 lifetimes, the only person who'd ever known her before and after, and hadn't flinched at either. And she gave him the smile, the big one, the one she used on the roof of a moving trolley and the top of the 8th Street mast, and every stupid, glorious, doomed moment of a life spent throwing herself at things much larger than she was. "Oi," she said. "Angie." He shook his head. He was shaking his head and shaking his head. "You know what I want," said Cherri Bomb. And she signed her name. The paper took it and drank it, and the hell script crawled and settled, and the room dropped 10 degrees, and every light in the studio guttered down to a dull red ember, and something very old and very stupid and utterly without mercy woke up in the middle of that table and started to read. Valentino put out his hand. He was still smiling. He would be smiling for another 16 hours, roughly, which was as long as it took. "Pleasure doing business," said Valentino, and Cherri Bomb shook it. "Being owned doesn't feel like anything. That's the part nobody warns you about." Cherri had expected, she didn't know, chains, a weight, something to fight, some grinding, obvious wrongness she could set her back against and shove. She'd spent 26 years dead learning exactly one skill, which was how to be a small, hard thing that would not move. And she'd walked into that room ready to spend the rest of eternity being it. There was nothing to be it at. She sat on a leather couch in the corner of Valentino's cathedral of a studio, while the crew reset the lights around her, and she felt completely, entirely normal. She could stand up, she checked. She stood up, and sat down, and stood up again, and nobody stopped her. She could have walked out the door. She could have thrown a bomb through the ring light. There was no hand on her at all. The hand was in the paper. That's the trick. That's the whole obscene genius of it. Hell doesn't put a collar on you, because a collar can be cut. Hell writes your name in a book, and then whenever anybody asks the world whose is she, the world checks the book. It's not a chain, it's a fact. You are simply, now, a thing with an owner, the way a chair is a thing with an owner, and the chair doesn't feel owned either. And if you burned the studio down and ran to the far side of the Pride Ring and lived in a hole for 1,000 years, you would still be his, because it says so, on the paper, in ink. And one day he'd get around to sending for you, and the world would check the book, and you'd go. "You want a drink, doll?" one of the crew asked her. He looked apologetic. He'd been the one carrying the ring light. There's a bar. Nah, right?" He hovered. "Sorry. "'S'all right, mate," said Cherri Bomb, who had never in her afterlife told anyone it was all right about anything. They let Angel Dust go at 6 in the morning. They did it properly, too, and that's the thing that will stay with everyone who saw it. Val had the contract dissolved in front of witnesses. He had the ledger amended. He had it notarized, because there is a notary in hell, and business is business. Then 2 of his boys walked Angel Dust down 41 floors, and opened the door, and put him out on the pavement in the red morning, like a man putting out a cat. And Angel Dust stood on the curb outside the studio he'd been walking into for 70 years, unowned, free and clear, in perpetuity, and made a sound that people in the building across the street have never been able to describe. He didn't feel free. That's not what it is. Take a thing out of a man that's been in him for 70 years, and he doesn't feel lighter. He feels like a hole. He stood there with all 4 hands over his mouth, and the sky went red, and he could not make his legs work in any direction, because the direction his legs knew was up, and he wasn't allowed up anymore. And the reason he wasn't allowed up was sitting on a leather couch on the 41st floor. Then he ran. He didn't run to the hotel. The hotel couldn't do anything. The hotel had already done everything it had. He'd heard Charlie on the phone with the King of Hell at 3 in the morning, and he'd heard what the King of Hell said. He ran through the 5th and the 9th, and he ran past every place he knew, and he found the corner, the stupid nothing corner in the worst block of the 5th, where a man with no address stood, because he had never mentioned needing one, and the man in the yellow suit was there. exactly there, hands in his pockets, watching a pigeon. "Oh," said Kizaru, "the spider fella," and Angel Dust, who had spent 50 years perfecting the art of never asking anybody for anything, who had built an entire personality out of the word fine, got down on his knees on the pavement in front of him and begged. It took 90 seconds. It wasn't dignified. Half of it wasn't words. Kizaru listened to all of it. He didn't help him up. He didn't say anything soothing. He stood there in the red morning with his hands in his pockets, and he listened, the whole way through, with those half-shut eyes, until Angel ran out of air and knelt there shaking on the concrete. Then he said, and then, "Is there paper?" Angel looked up. "What? Paper?" said Kizaru patiently. "Is there a document? Written down?" Yeah, he's got it. It's 6 feet long, he printed it. He's got it on the—" "Oh," said Kizaru. He took his hands out of his pockets. Angel Dust had been in hell for 70 years. He had been in a room with Alastor. He had watched Valentino take a man apart in a hallway for a scheduling error. He had seen the exterminations come down twice, and he had watched the sky open over the hotel and Adam himself come through it swinging. He said later that he had never, in his entire life or afterlife, been that frightened, and that the worst part was that nothing happened. The man just took his hands out of his pockets, and the light in the whole street changed. Not brighter, not dimmer, just wrong. The way a room goes wrong when a very large animal wakes up in it. And for about a second and a half every shadow on the block pointed at Angel Dust instead of away. Then it stopped, and he was just a bloke in a yellow suit again. "Well," said Kizaru, "let's go and have a look." They let him in. They walked him up. That's the thing. Val's own people opened the doors for him, and rode the lift with him, and one of them asked if he wanted a coffee, and he said yes, and drank it, in the lift, slowly, while 41 floors went by. Because Valentino wanted this. Of course he wanted it. Vox had called it, "You don't beat a rock, you find the lever." And now here it came, the lever pulling the rock right through his front door. And Valentino had waited 3 months to have the yellow man in a room, on his floor, under his lights, with a piece of paper between them, that the yellow man could not do one single thing about. That was worth more to Val than the soul was. Val didn't want Cherry Bomb. Val had never wanted Cherry Bomb. Val wanted a camera on the face of the one thing in hell that had never given anybody a reaction, at the exact moment it finally did. There were 9 cameras in that room when the lift opened. Velvet was live, 11 million on the feed and climbing by 50,000 a second. Vox had every screen in the tower on it, and had personally checked the exposure 3 times, because the footage had never worked before, and by God it was going to work today. Cherri was still on the couch. She stood up when he came in. She didn't mean to. She'd promised herself about 4 separate times in the last 2 hours that she wouldn't do anything pathetic, and then the doors opened and she was on her feet before she'd decided to be, and her one eye was very wide and very wet, and she said, "Oi, geezer, you shouldn't be here." Said Kizaru. "I mean it. This ain't yours. This ain't got nothing to do with you. You should be, go stand on your corner, mate. Go watch your pigeon." "Cherri," said Kizaru. He'd never used her name before, not once, in 6 weeks. She shut up. "Well, hey, sugar." Valentino came off the far wall like a curtain going up. 9 feet of him, all 4 arms wide, and the pink smoke rolled, and the crew scattered out of his way. "Look at you. In my house. You want a drink? Somebody get the man a drink. No? No. Straight to business. I respect that." Kizaru wasn't looking at him. He was looking at the table. "That's it? That's it, baby." Val spread both left hands over the 6 feet of cream paper like a man presenting a roast. Signed, sealed, notarized, and witnessed. "And you know what? You go ahead. You read it. Take all the time you want." He leaned in, and his voice went silk, and every camera in the room pushed in with him. "I want you to read it." "Oh," said Kizaru. "All right." He read it. He read it for 40 minutes. This is the part the 11 million never forgot, and it's the part Vox has never been able to explain to himself. And it's the reason the footage from that day is still circulating on every feed in the Pride Ring under about 900 different titles. Because everyone in that room was braced for a fight. Everyone in that room, Val, Vox, Velvet, the crew, the whole city watching, had spent 3 months building an idea of this man, and the idea was a bomb, a thing that would eventually, finally, go off. And they had all come to watch it go off. And instead he pulled out a chair and sat down and read a contract, line by line, left to right. He read it the way you read a warrant. He read it the way a man reads something he has read 10,000 times before in a language he was made out of, because that is what he is, and that's the thing nobody in hell had ever bothered to find out about him. They'd all seen the light, and none of them had asked what the light was for. 58 years, orders, and so on. Very good at it. A man does not stand at the top of an institution that long by being fast. He stands there by being the one who reads the paper. He asked for a pen at minute 9 to follow a line with, and Velvet gave him one before she'd thought about it. At minute 31, he went back to the top and started again. Valentino stopped talking at minute 19. Nobody noticed exactly when. At minute 40, Kizaru sat back. He said. Well, it came out of Val too fast, and too loud, and he heard it come out that way, and he hated it. Well, it's airtight, sugar, my lawyers. Your lawyers wrote the soul of the sinner known as Cherri bomb, said Kizaru mildly, and tapped the page. Right here. That's crossed out. Silence. Yeah, said Val. You crossed it out. I did. Why? And Valentino, live, on 9 cameras, in front of 11 million viewers and both of his business partners, did the thing Valentino has done every single day of his existence, which is that he could not stand to be the smaller man in a sentence. Because it wasn't enough, baby, he purred, and threw an arm out to the room, and gave it the full teeth. A soul, please. Souls are inventory. I got a warehouse of souls. I wanted the whole thing. Everything she is, everything she's got, everything she's ever gonna have. All of it. Forever. And that's what it says, right there in my own hand. And that's what I own. Everything that's hers, said Kizaru. That's right. Forever. Forever, roared Valentino, delighted, to the cameras. Oh, said Kizaru, and he turned around in the chair, away from the table, away from all 9 cameras, and looked across the room at a 5'2" demon girl, with one enormous eye, who was standing by a leather couch, with her fists clenched, and he asked her a question. Cherri, he said, what do you want? The room didn't get it. That's the thing. 11 million people were watching, and not one of them got it. And Vox, who was the smartest person in the building, who had a screen for a face and 100 feeds in his head, Vox got it about 4 seconds before anybody else, and made a noise like a modem dying. Cherri got it immediately. She stood there and she felt the whole thing land in her chest, all of it at once, and her eye went enormous, and her mouth opened and nothing came out, because she'd asked him first, on a curb, on the 9th, with a bag of candy, 6 weeks and a lifetime ago. What do you want, mate? And he'd looked up at the red sky and thought about it, honestly thought about it, for the first time in 58 years, and said nothing, I think. Nobody had ever asked her back, not once, not in 26 years dead and however many alive. Nobody in this entire city had ever once turned around and asked Cherri bomb what she wanted, because everybody could see she was a girl with no wants at all, and that was the whole point of her. That was the armor. That was the reason she'd never had a hook in her and never would. You can't, she said. Her voice came out wrecked. Mate, you can't. You don't get it. You're the only thing down here that's safe. You're the only thing this dump can't get a hand on. And the second you, said Kizaru. I know. Then don't. Oh, he said. But I want to. And the man who had walked through 900 rounds and one angelic blade, and the radio demon himself, the man who could not be threatened, bought, filmed, hurt, bound, or aimed at, the man who had spent 58 years being the strongest thing in creation because he had never once given the world a handle to hold him by, stood up and put his hands in his pockets and offered a 58-year-old man's entire life to a demon girl in a room full of cameras, in the flattest, sleepiest, most catastrophically unromantic voice anybody in hell had ever heard. "Marry me," said Kizaru. Somebody dropped a light. "Are you insane?" Cherri whispered. "Probably." "I'm owned, you daft old. I'm property. I signed the—" "Yes," Kizaru agreed. "That's rather the point." "What?" said Valentino. "And Cherri Bomb, 26 years dead, 91 confirmed turf wars, never once owned by a single soul until 4 o'clock that morning, started to laugh. It came up out of her like it had been waiting. It came up filthy and cracked and enormous, and she laughed until she had to sit down on the floor, in front of 9 cameras, in the middle of the worst room in hell, with the paper on the table behind her that said she was furniture. And she got one word out, and it was the only word she'd ever meant in her entire existence. "Yeah," said Cherri, and every light in the tower went to sepia. The lift dinged, and it hadn't moved. An old-time band struck up somewhere far away and slightly wrong. Frost bloomed across the inside of 41 floors of window glass, and the temperature dropped 100 years. And Velvet's feed, 11 million, climbing, live, filled edge to edge with red static and a grin. "Well," said Alastor, who had been watching, who had said he would, who had never once, in his whole grinning career, been able to resist a show. "Oh, this is delicious. And I did say watching was free." The cane spun. The dials in his eyes wound all the way over. "But I'm afraid, Valentino, that officiating is what I'd call a public service. No charge, no deal, no strings whatsoever." He leaned into the nearest camera until his teeth filled it. "I simply wouldn't miss it for the world." Valentino, very quietly, said, "Wait. Nobody has ever adequately explained how Alastor got into that tower. Vox has 3 theories and hates all of them. The building is his. The building is him, in every way that counts. Every wire, every screen, every camera, 41 floors of a thing with a television for a head. And the radio demon walked into it like a man stepping into a lift he'd called himself. Static in the drywall, that sepia crawl bleeding out of the light fixtures, the old-time band, faint and slightly wrong, playing out of speakers Vox had installed personally and could not turn off. Later, when he'd calmed down enough to think, Vox would work out the answer and like it even less. Alastor was there because of the contract, their contract, the one Vox had signed himself, in his own tower, in a moment of enormous cleverness, to buy the radio demon out of the leash Rosie had held for 7 years. Vox had made Alastor free. That had been the deal. Vox had gotten something out of it. He'd never say what, and it had felt like a lot at the time. And in exchange, the oldest, hungriest, most theatrical horror in Pentagram City had been handed his own reins and told to enjoy himself. And now here he was, enjoying himself, free of every string in hell except the ones he liked, standing in the middle of Vox's 41st floor with a microphone-topped cane and a grin you could tune a radio to, and Vox could not make him leave, because you cannot make a man leave a room he is not in a room to be made to leave. "Beloved," Alastor boomed, 9 cameras, 11 million people, frost climbing the windows. "We are gathered, and my word, are we gathered." "Turn it off," Vox said. His screen was crawling. Vel, turn the feed off." Velvet didn't move. Velvet was staring at her phone. "Velvet, it's working," she said. "What?" "The footage, Vox." She turned the screen around. Her hand was not entirely steady, and Velvet's hand had not been unsteady in 90 years. "It's working. Look at him. Look, you can see him, and you could." 3 months of white smears and blown-out sensors, and 11 million views of a hole where a man should be. And now, on every feed in hell, in perfect focus, in a canary yellow suit under a ring light, Admiral Kizaru, standing beside a 5'2" demon girl, entirely visible, because he'd stopped moving. Not his feet, something else. Something that had been sliding out of frame for 58 years, had simply, finally, stood still, and let itself be looked at. "Vel!" said Vox. Quietly now. Vel, turn it off. Why? Vox had 4 seconds on everybody in that room. He'd had them since Kizaru asked the question, and he'd spent one of them making a noise like a modem dying, and the next 3 running the math he'd been running for 3 months. The same math, over and over. Find the lever. Everybody's got a lever. You can't grab a rock, but you can grab what the rock loves. And somewhere in the 4th second, the math had turned around and looked at him, because a lever works both ways. Val, Vox screamed it across the studio. Val, don't let him. And Valentino, 9 feet of him, wreathed in pink, in his own house, on his own floor, with 9 cameras on him, and 11 million people watching, and the biggest win in 100 years, sitting on a table in his own handwriting, threw all 4 arms wide and laughed. Let him what? Val was radiant. He was ecstatic. Let him get married? On my floor? Baby, are you kidding me? Roll it. Roll all of it. Somebody get a second unit on the girl. He turned to the cameras, teeth out, glasses flashing. You know what this is? This is content. Val, it's a wedding, Vox. It don't change a comma. She's still mine. The paper's still mine. Everything she is, and everything that's hers. And he was gesturing at the 6 feet of cream-colored contract on the table as he said it, gesturing with all 4 hands, the way he'd gestured at it an hour ago, the way he'd been gesturing at it all morning, because he had never once in his existence been able to stop pointing at his own cleverness, forever. Let him have the party. Let him have the cake. What's she gonna do? Honeymoon her way out of a notarized. He stopped. You could actually watch it arrive. 11 million people did, and the clip has been slowed down, frame by frame, on every feed in the Pride Ring ever since. The exact instant the smile came apart on Valentino's face, as the sentence he was in the middle of saying finished itself without him. Everything that's hers. Oh, said Kizaru. The ceremony took 90 seconds. Alastor could have stretched it to an hour, and everyone knew it. And the fact that he didn't is the single most frightening thing the radio demon has ever done. Do you, he purred, take this appalling little woman? Yeah. Ah, I hadn't finished. Oh, Kizaru put a hand in his pocket. Sorry, go on. To have, to hold, to keep, to keep. And Alastor leaned on it, and every radio in Pentagram City leaned on it with him. Forever and entire. All that you are and all that is yours. Freely given. No coercion. No consideration. No debt. No price. The dials in his eyes wound all the way over and stayed there. Of your own free will, sir. And let the record show that I asked. And here is where it happened, and it is the only part of this story that matters. Kizaru took his time. He was, as everyone in hell had learned, a man who took his time about everything, which was the funniest fact about him, because he was also the fastest thing that had ever existed. He stood in a room full of cameras, and he looked at a demon girl with one enormous eye and white pink hair and a spiked choker, who was crying and absolutely refusing to acknowledge that she was crying, and who had asked him a question on a curb 6 weeks ago that no one had thought to ask him in 58 years. 58 years of orders, and so on. Very good at it. A man who had never once given the world a handle to hold him by, and who had therefore never once been held. Said Kizaru. Yes, and the word went into the world, and the world took it, and something enormous, and old, and utterly without mercy sat up in the middle of that table, and started to read. And do you, said Alastor, delighted, to Cherri, take this ridiculous old man. Cherri Bomb wiped her eye with the back of her wrist and said the only word she'd ever meant. Yeah. Kizaru gave her a candy. It was a small one, and yellow, and it had been in his pocket since the 9th, and he put it in her palm and folded her fingers over it, and she made a sound that was not a laugh, and was not anything else either. Then by whatever authority I have declared myself to have. The cane spun. The band went sideways. The whole room dropped to black and white. I pronounce it done. The contract on the table went off like a struck bell. Here is what hell's oldest magic did next, and you have to understand that it did not think about it, because it has never thought about anything. It is not smart. It is not kind. It is literal, and it is old, and it has never once in all of eternity been given a reason to check its work. It had one instruction, written 4 inches tall in the hand of the man who owned it, double underlined, witnessed on 9 cameras and confirmed out loud by the author himself in front of 11 million people. Everything she is, and everything that's hers. The whole package, forever, and 90 seconds ago, freely and of his own will, with no coercion and no consideration and no price, the strongest man alive had made himself hers. So the contract reached for him. It reached the way it had reached for Denny Vosk's television salesman's soul in a pawn shop in the 5th. The way it had reached for a scared kid with a needle in his arm 70 years ago. The way it has reached for every damned thing in every ledger in every ring, since before this city had streets. And it closed its hand around a man made of light, and there was nothing there. There was never going to be anything there. That was never the trap. The trap was that it couldn't let go. Because hell never takes by force. That is the one law. That is Lucifer's rule. The only fair thing he ever did. The thing he wouldn't break at 3 in the morning for his own daughter's crying. A soul only opens from the inside. Always. No exceptions. Forever. The contract could not take Kizaru, because Kizaru had never shaken Valentino's hand. And the contract could not stop trying to take Kizaru, because the clause said forever, in Val's own writing, and forever has no lapse in it, and no out, and no expiry, and nowhere at all to put a failure, a thing that must, and cannot, and never ends. The paper began to burn, backwards, like a fuse, not toward the man it couldn't hold. There was nothing at that end to burn to. It burned the other way, up the claim, up the terms, through the 4-inch letters and the double underline, hunting for the hand that had promised the impossible. It found the signature. There was only one. That was the thing about firing your lawyer through a wall. Nobody had told Valentino that when you cross out what the professionals wrote and put in your own words, in your own hand, on your own paper, you are not the buyer anymore. You're the warranty. Oh, said Valentino. He looked at his hand. It was already going. Oh, agreed Kizaru, sympathetically. And then the fuse hit the ledger, because it was all one book. That's the thing about an empire. Every contract Valentino had ever held, every soul in the warehouse, every signature and clause and hook and handshake in 70 years of the most profitable cruelty in Pentagram City. One instrument, one hand, one man, and the fire came up through it, looking for the party in breach, and found him at the bottom of every single page, and it burned the whole thing. 41 floors of window glass went white. Somewhere below, in a building on the 6th, a woman who had not been able to leave a room since 1972 stood up and walked out of it. In the studios on the 4th, 31 people stopped in the middle of what they were doing and could not explain, to anyone, ever, what had just come out of them. All across the Pride Ring, in ones and twos and dozens and then hundreds, Valentino's ledger emptied into the street. And on the 41st floor, Cherri Bomb felt a thing she had never noticed being there, go out of her like a splinter. Huh, she said. Valentino did not die. That's important, and it's worse. He stood in the middle of his own cathedral, with the smoke thinning around him for the first time in 70 years, and he was still 9 feet tall, and he still had 4 arms, and there was absolutely nothing left inside the outline. An overlord is not a strong demon. An overlord is a ledger. Take the book, and what's left is a moth in a nice coat, standing in a room, on camera. He turned around. The crew were all just people now. 16 of them. They'd been his an hour ago and they weren't. And they stood there holding lights and booms and cables and looked at him. And the silence in that room was the biggest sound in the history of Pentagram City. The kid with the ring light, the one who'd apologized to Cherri on the couch, who'd asked if she wanted a drink, set the light down on the floor, carefully, like he didn't want to break it. Then he walked out. They all did. Velvet was already on her phone. She didn't look up. She was typing fast, and what she typed, the whole city knows now, because it went out 90 seconds later to 40 million people. V's deny, any current affiliation. Vel, said Valentino. Said Velvet. Vel. Vox hadn't moved at all. Vox was standing exactly where he'd been standing when he'd screamed, 4 seconds too early, at a man who never listened, and his screen was blank, and it stayed blank, and he was looking at the wreckage of the smartest plan he'd had in 100 years, and doing the only thing left to do with it, which was learn. You don't grab what the Rock loves, Vox was thinking. You don't go anywhere near what the Rock loves. He'd remember that. He'd remember that for a very long time. The doors banged open, and the Hazbin Hotel came through them. All of it. Charlie first. Because of course Charlie was first. Hair everywhere, still in pajama bottoms, having watched the whole thing on a phone in a lobby with 40 sinners screaming at it. Vaggie with her spear out and nothing left to point it at. Husk. Nifty, who went straight for the burned table and began to tidy it. And Angel Dust, unowned, free and clear, in perpetuity, who came through the door, 41 floors up, in a building he'd sworn he would never enter again, and did not even look at Valentino. He went to Cherri. He picked her up off the floor, all 4 arms, and she was swearing at him and he was crying, and neither of them said anything worth writing down, and that was the picture that ran on every feed in hell for a month. Not the burning, not the moth, just that. Charming, announced Alastor to nobody, and began to fade. And no charge whatsoever. No deal, no strings, no consideration. A public service. The grin hung a beat longer than the rest of him, the way it always did. Do tell me if you ever need officiating again, Vox. I'm told I'm rather good at it. The static went out. Vox's tower, when the frost finally cleared, was very quiet. They found him on the corner in the 5th, 2 days later. The stupid nothing corner in the worst block. No address, no reason. Watching a pigeon do something a pigeon does. Charlie had come to say thank you, which was such a Charlie thing to do that Cherri had insisted on coming to watch. I have to know, Charlie said. You read it for 40 minutes. Did you plan that? All of it? The whole, the marriage, the clause, the... Oh, said Kizaru. He thought about it. He genuinely thought about it, in that unhurried way, and the red sky hung low over Pentagram City, and somewhere behind them, a woman who'd been in a warehouse since 1972 was learning what a street looked like. No, he said. I just wanted to... Charlie stared at him. Cherry Bomb, who was sitting on the curb with her boots in the gutter and a bag of ordnance beside her, and a yellow candy she had not eaten and was never going to, laughed so hard she nearly fell over. Because that was the whole thing. That was the only thing. Hell is a marketplace, and every soul has a price, and the machine has run for eternity on one simple honest fact, which is that everybody wants something, and the road to the wanting is the road to the person. And the strongest man alive had walked through this city for 3 months, untouched, unkillable, unbuyable, unaimable at, precisely because he had never wanted anything at all. And then he'd wanted something. And it turned out that a man who wants exactly one thing, and does not care in the slightest what it costs him, is not weaker than a man who wants nothing. He's the only thing hell has never had a word for. Oi, geezer, said Cherri. Sun's up? She stood, and slung the bag, and grinned at her husband with every tooth she had. Let's go blow something up. Oh, said Kizaru, and put his hands in his pockets, and went.